Thank you very much. Again, this is Tom Leung. I'm the PM for Google Website Optimizer. Good morning to all of the folks on the West Coast. Good afternoon to the folks on the East Coast, and good evening to those of you joining from Europe. I'm very excited this morning to talk to you a little bit about Website Optimizer, specifically about an area that we get a lot of questions about, which is what exactly should I be testing? As you may know, we've done a number of webinars in the past about how to set up a Website Optimizer test, and it seems like a lot of people have gotten over that hurdle, and now they're asking, okay, well, I know how to put the tags on the pages, but I'm still not certain what is the best thing to test to make sure I get the optimal result. And so I'm very pleased to host this webinar and also to be joined by a guest presenter, Brian Eisenberg from Future Now. And the goal of this webinar is really for you to walk away with a good grasp and some ideas of things that you can look at for potential test candidates on your website. Let's look at the agenda, what we'll cover this morning. First thing I'm going to do is we'll spend about 20 minutes talking about Website Optimizer, what the product is, some areas where you can get more resources. And then the next half hour, I'll turn it over to Brian, and he's going to really dig into how to think about what to test and the kind of frameworks that you can use to design optimal tests to perform. He'll also have a few examples and case studies. And then lastly, we've received a number of questions. We looked at all of them from those questions that were submitted during registration, and we've highlighted some that seem to come up more than others, so we'll be taking those in a question and answer session. Just for some housekeeping, this webinar will be archived and available at the Website Optimizer homepage in our resources section. So if you are going to do that, but you'll also be able to view it in a few weeks on demand. And the other thing is, if you have any problems with technical difficulties, we encourage you to contact the WebEx customer support for any of your video issues. And if you have any audio issues, then British Telecom ET conferencing technical support should be able to help you. So without further ado, let's move on. Website Optimizer, for those of you who may not be familiar, is a product we shipped about a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, when we became fully available to the public. And the way to think about Website Optimizer is it is really a part of an entire system of tools that Google provides to website owners to improve overall performance. So you probably are familiar with Google AdWords, which is really focused on driving the right traffic to your site and bringing people to your site who are interested in what your organization has to offer. And then we have a great tool, Google Analytics, which actually had some recent major updates with audio ads and site search reports and a number of other really innovative new features that they shipped in the last few weeks. And that's all about monitoring the performance. So you use AdWords to bring people to your site, and then you can use analytics to monitor and see what's going on. And then Website Optimizer kind of closes the loop, and it lets you optimize your content and perform experiments to improve the effectiveness of those pages, so that as more people come to your site and as you get a better handle on what's going on, you can then take action and improve your website to significantly outpace your competition in terms of conversion rates, be they sales or be they newsletter subscriptions, or really, viewing demos or viewing articles, whatever your website's trying to do. All of these three tools work together. They can also be used separately. So none of them requires another one. So if you just want to use AdWords, of course you can do that. If you just want to use analytics and just want to use Website Optimizer, that's fine as well. When you use all three together, you do definitely get some synergy there. So how does content experimentation work? Visitors arrive at your site, and Website Optimizer will then divide those visitors randomly into different treatments or different versions of a page that you let us know about. So when you set up an experiment, you may say, well, here's my original page, but I'm really curious about if I change the image or if I change some of the button treatment, will that really have any impact on the ultimate goal? In this case, it would be sales. So what we do then is after we distribute the visitors to each of the different treatments, we'll then track and let you know, well, actually, of those who saw this version here, only 2% made a purchase, and of those who saw this treatment, 14% did, and this one, 20% did. So it effectively lets you perform controlled experiments on your site and takes the guesswork out of improving any page. So a lot of the things that Brian's going to help you think about will be complementary to Website Optimizer in that it's not going to be entirely certain what improvements are going to drive the biggest changes in your conversion rate. And for some people, some improvements will work, and for others, some will not. And the only way to really know is to ask your customers, which is what Website Optimizer enables you to do. So in this case, we show you the winning combination. Now, a little bit of a summary of Website Optimizer. For those of you who aren't familiar with the details of the product, some of the benefits are that it's free. It allows you to perform unlimited experiments on any of your website content. It's very easy to use. Our A/B testing capability generally takes about 5 minutes to set it up, as long as you have the pages ready to go. We also support multivariate testing, which is still easy and takes about 10-15 minutes. It will not impact your SEO efforts. So all of our experimentation content is delivered through JavaScript tags. So that won't have an impact on your SEO. It is backed by Google, obviously, so that to the extent that you are interested in a service that is supported by our infrastructure and our active development and commitment, you can rest assured that betting on Website Optimizer is probably a pretty safe bet. It is not uncommon to see increases in conversions by over 25%. If you employ some of the advice that Brian will be giving you, you'll probably blow that number away. But to be conservative, we find it's very common to get 20-25% improvement. We also have discussion groups, tutorials, and a consultant network, of which our guest speaker, Brian, is a part of and a charter member of. Some of the specific features that we support are A/B split testing, multivariate, follow-up testing, which is really important just to confirm that you have your winner and that it is as strong as it initially appeared. It will work with all of your traffic. So while to access it, you need to have an AdWords account. To be clear, you don't need to spend any money with AdWords. In fact, you don't even need to give us your billing information. You just need to have an AdWords username and password. And then when you get into AdWords, you'll see under the Campaign Management tab the Website Optimizer link. And when you set up an experiment, it'll certainly do tests on your traffic that comes from AdWords, but it'll also include in the experiment traffic that comes from organic or other PPC networks or wherever it comes from. And we will do all of the math for you. So basically one of the things that we've heard a lot of people concerned about is, well, I like the idea of testing and maybe a multivariate testing, but I really don't have the time to, do all of the reading and all of the math and the analysis to figure out if something's statistically significant or not, or knowing when I have a winner. So, we literally have teams of mathematicians that work on our algorithm, and we're constantly enhancing it to make sure that you have as accurate results as quickly as possible. It is platform independent, so if you don't use AdWords or if you perhaps don't use Google Analytics, maybe use another web analytics tool, that's fine. Website Optimizer is designed to work with AdWords and Analytics seamlessly, but it also works fine with all the others as well. And lastly, it is a product that we are actively developing and improving all the time. So it's not uncommon for every few months for us to release enhancements and new features that make the tool even more powerful than it was in the previous quarter. So here's an example of a report you'll see after you run your experiment. And what we try to do is basically show you all of the different treatments or all of the different versions of the pages that you wanted to test. And then we'll tell you, okay, well, this is the conversion rate that we've observed. Here's the confidence interval. And as you can see in this case, it's significantly superior to the original. We'll also tell you what the difference between the two in conversion rate is, as well as the raw data on how many visitors saw the page and how many converted. And then you can also click on any of these links, and you'll see a preview of what the page looks like. And then in this case, it's a multivariate test, so we also have a page section report, which will perform a fractional analysis to the extent that your traffic does not necessarily support the full factorial analysis. And if that doesn't make any sense, not to worry. We will just tell you when we have a winner, and you can just let us do the math for you. So in this case, you see that we'll show the relative improvement over the original between any combination. So this is a great one where, you know, your boss swears to you on a stack of Bibles that, well, you know, this is the version that's going to do the best. I have 100 years of experience in marketing and MBA from some fancy place, when in reality, your customers may actually think that combination 11 was far superior. You know, hopefully that might have been the one that you had suggested. But in any case, you can really take a lot of the debate out of website design and website improvement by just testing a number of things and letting your customers tell you what works best for them. So the last thing I'd like to talk about before we move on is there are a host of resources that we provide beyond the free software. So if you go to google.com/website optimizer, you'll find our microsite, which has the overview demo. It also has a number of previous webinars where we've archived the video and the audio, so if you missed them, that's a great place to check out. As I mentioned, this webinar is going to be focused on what to test. Now, if you feel like, oh, well, after this webinar, you've got a good sense of what to test, but you're still not sure how to set up a test in terms of, okay, well, what is it that you're talking about, JavaScript tags, and where do I put them in, and where on the page should I place them, and how does Website Optimizer work? There are a number of seminars that we've done in the past where we walk you through step-by-step how to do that. So I definitely encourage you to go to Website Optimizer's website and then check out the online resources section. We also have a number of articles on testing best practices, as well as little test recipes and strategies. So it's a great resource. It's probably one of the most robust areas on the web to get all of your testing information. So definitely check that out after the webinar if you're interested in learning more. So next I'd like to talk about when you think about your entire website and you've decided to invest some time in doing testing, where do you start? And one way to think about that is to divide your site into sections based on how much traffic they get and how much of a problem you believe there is already with the way that that content is displayed or designed or what that content actually is. So in this quadrant down here, this is probably where you want to spend the least amount of time testing. So these are pages that they don't get a lot of traffic, and in your mind, they actually are pretty good. And in that case, the ROI for testing is probably much lower than other pages on your site. And as much as we love you to test every page, I think we're pretty realistic that, you know, marketers are busy people. It's not insignificant to get support from IT and your design team to produce alternate content. So we really want to help you think about where to go first. And the opposite of this section would be up here in the northeast quadrant, where you have a ton of traffic. This is usually the initial landing page or key areas in a funnel that have the most people visiting. And there are also some known problems. So you have high known problems. But these are pages that are also where, as an example, you would be kind of embarrassed to show colleagues in the industry and say, well, you know, actually we haven't touched this home page in 2 years, or Well, actually, we've been using this landing page for our PPC campaigns, but frankly, if it were up to me, I would change this image and change this headline. I just haven't gotten around to it. Those are the perfect candidates for doing testing early, because if they get a lot of traffic and you make a small improvement, you're still going to receive great benefits downstream in terms of the ultimate conversion event. You're also going to have a greater probability of finding a winner, because you already have hypotheses on what to test, because you know that, well, there really is something wrong with this image, or this headline is really confusing, or this detailed information doesn't include some key things. But at least you think those are problems. And again, you don't really know until you execute a test. But what a great place to start is up here. So when you finally pick that page and you're looking at it and you're trying to think, okay, well, what is it that I'm going to test? One way to think about it is that every page has a number of knobs. And when you design it, you make these decisions sometimes in a split second. And you decide, okay, well, should the page have, thousands of words or dozens of words? Should the page be laid out left, right, 3-column, 1-column, top, bottom? Should the copy be very factually bullet point, data-oriented, or should it have a more emotional appeal? Should the page be trying to get you to provide information and become a lead, or is it trying to get you to provide payment and purchase the product, or perhaps it's trying to just get you to the next step in some overall process? And there really isn't one answer for all customers. Every website owner has a different page, a different content, a different goal, different type of person visiting its site. And the only way to really know what combination of just these 4 knobs, and there's probably dozens, is to do some testing. And later on, Brian is going to be telling you about how to think about that in more detail. But I just wanted to call out this notion that every page has a number of decisions that are built into it, and most of those decisions were kind of made with assumptions that you have, or habits or preferences, and oftentimes those are not optimal. And the only way to know for certain is to say, okay, well, let's create the page as I think it should be, and then let's create the page if I were wrong. How would I create this? Or have someone else make suggestions. And instead of sitting in a conference room and arguing for half an hour as to what the page should look at, you create 2 pages, or any number of pages, and then you distribute them across your visitors and see which one actually performs the best. Some additional ideas for experimentation are trying out new headlines, images, and call to action buttons, layout. Testimonials are great. A great testimonial test could be, does the presence of a testimonial at all matter? And then after, if you've determined that it does, then which testimonial matters? Is it the one that emphasizes your service? Is it the one that emphasizes your company's or organization's long history? Is it one that emphasizes a particularly famous user of yours? What is it that's going to really convince people that your company is the one they want to work with? The actual copy. There are literally libraries of books written on copywriting, and I won't go into that. I know Brian will a little bit more, but there's a number of small changes you can make to copy which often have major impact. And anybody who's been involved in direct marketing knows that very well. Embedded widgets are also wonderful candidates for testing. So these days, it seems like you can get a code snippet from any company and insert things on your web page. Is that the right thing to do? I mean, does it really help to have a YouTube video on your site? Does it help to have the click-to-call, from Grand Central or whatever provider you like to use? Does it really help to have the latest news headlines or a feed from your blog on your homepage? It's not clear. Some people would argue, well, those are kind of distractions, and other people would argue, no, that increases the engagement and helps people get to know your organization better. Some of those widgets will work and some won't, and it really depends on your company and your audience. And one great test to do is basically you could have Website Optimizer show some of your visitors no widgets and some of them certain widgets and some all of them, and see which one actually does the best in terms of getting people to, fill out the contact form or subscribe to the feed or, subscribe to a newsletter or advance to some follow-on page. Other things that you could think about testing include provision of coupons, different button designs, fonts, styles, incentives, emphasis on free shipping versus 20% off. There are a lot of companies that do all of that. They'll give you free shipping and a money-back guarantee, but it isn't clear that listing all of that on the landing page or on any page is going to do the best job at converting users. Maybe only listing one of them is, or maybe listing all of them is. I mean, you could test any number of iterations. Form fields are a great one. A lot of people will say, and I think they're right in many cases, that the more forms you have, the worse off you'll do. And the sort of rule of thumb people have used is, for every additional form you have, you'll drop your conversion rate by 50%. That's not always the case. And going from 10 fields to 9 fields may not be the same as going from 2 to 1 or 10 to 2. So doing those kinds of tests, presence of a field or not, or even how you describe the field. Do you basically say name, or do you say contact information, or does it help to put information saying we will only use your email for authentication, or does that just add more attention to you asking for the email than you want? Any of those things are worthy of testing, and it's not just merchants or B2B businesses. Publishers can do testing. We've seen some website publishers testing navigation experiences. Some of them have tested different features that are thought to increase engagement, like the little RSS feed button or the comment here button or any of those things. At the end of the day, every page has almost infinite things that can be tested. The truly successful are able to look at the whole series of tests you can perform and get you ahead of the game by focusing on those tests that are most likely to give you the best results. Now, of course, if you have unlimited time and resources, you can test anything you can think of. But I think one of the things that we've seen with the most successful people is they're going to set themselves up for success by testing things that are most likely to get them the results they're looking for. Some best practices before we hand it off to Brian is test a small number of variations. So the rule of thumb is you're going to want 100 to 200 conversions per treatment. So as an example, if your website or your company has 500 conversions over a period of 2 weeks on average, you're not going to want to test more than 4 or 5 different versions of a page. And so if you're doing an A/B test, that would be original and 4 alternate pages. If you're doing a multivariate test, that may be a 2x2 test, because the way multivariate works is for every section there are a number of variations, and you multiply them. So if there's 2 headlines and 2 images, that's actually 4 combinations, because there's headline 1, image 1, headline 1, image 2, and so forth. So if there's one thing you take away from my section of this presentation is start small. Don't try to boil the ocean, because as efficient as the math can get, if you only have 100 conversions a week and you're trying to test 1,000 versions of a page, we're going to have to wait a long time to be able to tell you with any confidence which page is better. Test bold changes. So one of the things that we like to recommend is if a colleague can't see a difference within a few seconds, there's a chance your visitors won't either. Now, that's a rule that has exceptions, but in general, especially if you're doing your first test and you want to kind of hit the ground running, make sure that the changes are pretty bold and pretty dramatic. Consider early indicators. So some people say, well, look, I sell $200,000 software packages. I don't have thousands of conversions a week, as much as I'd like to. And if I require a lot of data to be able to give Website Optimizer the opportunity to tell me what's better, instead of making the conversion goal the final purchase, you could say, well, actually the goal of the page will be to request more information. Or the goal of the page is to remain on the page for at least 3 seconds. So the goal of the page is to advance to the next page in the lead generation process. So those are things that can dramatically increase your data rate so that you can test more combinations. And then don't jump to conclusions. A lot of people get really excited about testing, as they should be, but they may sort of see some version of the page kind of inch ahead and say, oh, well, that's enough. I see that this has validated what I thought was going to win, and now I'm going to stop the experiment. Generally, you want to wait at least 2 weeks. Internally, when we do testing, we run them for at least a month. So at this point, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Brian Eisenberg. And before I do that, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. For those of you who aren't familiar, Brian is a co-founder of FutureNow. He is a charter member of our Website Optimizer Authorized Consultant Network. You can find more information about his company at futurenowinc.com or read his blog at grok.com. And I can tell you that I am an avid reader of grok.com. It is definitely worth subscribing to. And he is a pioneer in the field of persuasion architecture and has published numerous books. So I'm very excited to hand this over to Brian, and I think you're going to learn a ton from him. Brian?
Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate spending the time here and being able to share with folks a little bit about 10-plus years of working with clients to optimize their website. And so I'd really like to start with an actual client from a few years ago who came to us because they wanted us to analyze their whole website. And as we were looking at their website, we're looking at the analytics, and we were looking at those high-profile pages that Tom alluded to earlier, ones that have a lot of traffic, but we're seeing a lot of exits. We stumbled across this page, which was the movie page for Overstock.com. And what we learned about the page was that 92% of the traffic that was coming to this page, and a very high-traffic page, was abandoning it right away. Now, typically, the way most people would go about trying to improve this page is to zoom in on, let's say, the main section of the page and decide, okay, well, here's a section, and here's another section, and here's another section, and they go through every single one of these sections, decide which ones they wanted to test, come up with a bunch of different variations, and hopefully they would assume, like magic, they'd get the right answer, and the results would improve. There's only one flaw to this, and this is the one flaw I've seen very often in a lot of the other tools that are out there that like to talk about the millions of variations that you can test. And I think Tom really pointed to the key point here. Keep the test small, and here's why. When you test these millions of variations, you run into the risk of what I like to call the infinite monkey theorem. And most of you have heard this before. If you put enough monkeys in front of typewriters, eventually you'll recreate Shakespeare. But you may get a better result this way, right? You may improve your conversion somewhat, but you're obviously not going to get an optimal experience just by luck. It takes time really understanding your customers and paying attention to their needs to eventually get you what you want and get that end result of improved conversions. So what is the secret to improving online conversion? Well, I'll share with you the secret is very, very old, from the time of Hippocrates, who first identified that human beings basically come in four psychological preferences or types. He referred to them as melancholic, sanguine, choleric, and phlegmatic, who are just wonderful names. But, some of you may have heard of these from David Kiersey and Myers-Briggs types. These types have gone through history, and we've had all different kinds of names to them. What it all boils down to is very simply four different perspectives, which is human beings are split bilaterally. In other words, they have a right side of the brain and a left side of the brain. In other words, they're a little bit more logical or they're a little bit more emotional. Or they could be a little bit more fast-paced or a little bit more deliberate in their decision-making. And so for the sake of understanding it through this webinar, I'm going to call these four types the competitive, the spontaneous, the methodical, and the humanistic. So let's take a look back at the page in a couple of moments and see how we'll use that information to improve conversion. But just so you get a sense of what kind of an impact this has on how people of different perspectives use the web and advertise and stuff like that. I want to show a couple of quick research studies from my buddies over at Bunnyfoot. And you can see here a quick heat map of an eye tracking study that they did on Google for someone doing the search. And you'll notice a lot of links, a lot of different places where they're looking. This is someone who's obviously a little bit more methodical or a little bit more detail-oriented compared to this search for same search, but you see here they're looking more at more of the interactive parts. And again, this is someone who's more emotionally engaged. You can also see it on different kinds of ads. So here's an ad, and when you see the heat maps, you'll see the longer durations for the people who are obviously more emotionally engaged versus the people who are more methodical, are taking a lot more time going through a lot more details of the product. So I think it's really interesting to note how you see these variations show up throughout the world. In fact, Jacob Nielsen, the famed usability guru, did one of his newsletters a couple of months ago, and he talked about how he noticed 4 different types of visitors when he did these eye tracking studies on the U.S. Census website. And we did a whole analysis of this on our blog, and you can go look at it. But you can, again, kind of see there's 4 different patterns that we recognize, and that number 4 usually relates back to human personality preferences. So let's go back to that page, this movie page, and look at these 4 perspectives. Say, okay, how do we get an answer on what to test? Well, we look at the page and we say, okay, people who are spontaneous, what are they looking for? What's the information they need in order to take an action to find the right movie? And spontaneous people typically like to look for top releases, bestsellers and stuff like that. And if you actually look closely at the page, you'll notice, they have the movie that was popular at the time, Lord of the Rings. They have the top 10 new releases, feature picks coming soon. All of these features really are great messaging for someone who's spontaneous. We're not worried about them. Humanistics. Well, they really care about what other people think, other reviews and stuff. Now, Overstock has hundreds of thousands of reviews, but at the time when they did this design, they didn't have any reviews on this page. So they really didn't satisfy the needs for humanistics. Methodicals. They generally like to search by genre, go ahead and navigate to find specific things that they're looking for. And the problem with this page is, as you look at it, it's actually fairly challenging to see where you can actually do this looking for a movie by genre. But if you look carefully underneath the search box, underneath the form field for Find a Movie, you will notice that it says Browse DVDs by genre or VHS by genre. So while they're doing something for methodicals, it really probably isn't executed very well. And then lastly is the competitives. And they're looking for something very specific, something that they have in mind. And when you look at the combination of this search box, right next to it there's a conversion problem, which is they have this image that says Kids Titles for Learning and Fun. Whenever you put 2 things together, people think that they are associated, right? This is kind of a law of proximity. Now, what's happening on this page is that people thought that when you did a search, all you were searching for were kids' titles. No wonder 92% of the audience was abandoning. We spoke to the CEO that night. They literally changed that one image. And that one image accounted for a 5% lift in their sales. So that one image accounted for about $25 million. So basically, $70,000 a day if they didn't plug this big hole in their website. Now, am I saying that everybody on this call has a $70,000 hole? Probably not, but you probably do have plenty of holes that if you took the time, you could find out how to improve them. You see, the challenge that most people face when they're thinking about conversion is they know that the conversion rate is where it's at today, whether it's a 2%, 3%, 5%, or even a 10%. What they don't know, per se, is where the conversion rate could actually achieve. How high can it actually go? Is it 100%? Well, probably not. Is it 50%? I doubt it. 25? Possible. 10 plus? Absolutely. There are plenty of sites that are doing 10 plus % conversion rates. The challenge is how do you go from where you are today to that higher number? And now I would ask all of you to think about if a genie appeared out of nowhere and decided to leave you a treasure map with the exact route of how to get to that global maximum conversion rate, how fast would you chase down that global maximum? Well, what I hope to do today is give you some of these key ideas to start working this magic, essentially, and getting yourself to that top conversion, because it is really possible to do. But I'm going to give you a framework for thinking about it. The first one is know your profiles. This is step 1. Now, whether you're doing, rich personas, which we won't go into here, or if you go as simple as methodical, spontaneous, humanistic, or competitive, or even take it even simpler to just, is it logical or is it emotional? And I'll show you examples of some of this stuff. Get an understanding of who your customers are. The better you know the customers, the better your tests are going to be. But even if you just slice and dice them a little bit, you'll start getting different perspectives to get better results. The second one is define the conversion goals of your test. What's the action you actually want people to take, right? Figure out what page we're going to test, and Tom talked about that a little bit earlier, those high-profile pages, and then determine where we're going to determine success. What's the success page? Is it just clicking on a button? Well, Google Optimizer can let you do that. Is it time spent? Or is it completing a purchase or filling out a form to become a lead? Any of those are fine. Just decide what they are. And then lastly, go about and do those creative ideas based on emotional, logical, spontaneous, humanistic, whatever they are. Have different messages to see how they impact on the different people who are coming to your website. And what I'd like to give you, because I see this as one of the most common problems when people are approaching testing, is kind of where to start. What's the hierarchy to make a decision about what to test? And so let's start at the bottom. All websites must be functional, right? The first thing they have to be able to do is do what it needs to do. If it's an e-commerce site, you need to be able to complete a purchase. If it's a lead generation site, well, you have to be able to complete the form. If it's a content site, you have to obviously, publish content. Whatever it is, you must make sure the site's functional. The second level is it accessible, right? We're going to see this as a common problem as websites like Target are seeing lawsuits for people who are blind and can't access the websites because the images don't have alt tags and things like that. If the page is displaying a 404 error, if your font sizes are too small, if you're using gray text on a white background or white text on a dark background, some of these things make it more difficult for people to obviously read. This is going to be a critical issue. The third one is it usable? Do people understand what they need to do to take the next step? Right? If it's not obvious to them what to do, they're not going to be able to proceed. So we've got to make sure the site's usable. The next level, and this is where you start seeing the much bigger gains once you solve these base problems, is intuitive. In other words, does the site flow exactly the way people think it should? When they click from link to link, are they getting the information that they're expecting? Are they seeing the things that they expect? Have you changed the layout too much on them? All these different kinds of things. And more importantly, have you given them the things to ensure their confidence? On every single step that people take in terms of their buying process, they have a chance for cognitive dissonance, something that makes them feel uncomfortable with the purchase. And so you have to make sure you're answering all the right questions for them to feel confident, like, is the product in stock? And we'll show some of these examples in a couple of moments. And then lastly, and most importantly, is it persuasive? Do people really want and understand what they are buying? Right? If you're selling rocks in a box, it will be not that important for people to really care that they want to buy it. Right? But if you're selling, gold bricks in a box, maybe they understand the value of it and it's much easier to sell. So you have to communicate this more effectively. The other thing I do want to point out with a lot of these things from the hierarchy is that the higher level, the persuasive ones, are the ones that take the most time and the most effort, but usually give you the greatest return. And so let's look at some of these and understand what we're going to go through. So I'm going to give you 5 key formulas that you can practice, and there are thousands of variables to focus on, but we're going to give you 5 to start working on today. The first one is product images, and they really can tell a story if you give people the right product images, and we'll show some examples of that. We're going to talk about testing your headlines and your copy. We're going to talk about how to improve your forms and what I like to call point-of-action assurances or shop with confidence messages. We're going to talk about how to improve your calls to action to make sure people click them, and of course, how not to let people wait because people want things now. They don't want to wait for them. So product images are really one of the most persuasive elements you can ever use on a website. Here's a hiking boot taken off of a typical, vendor who sells hiking boots, and I just want to show you a comparison of another hiking boot where it was shot with the sole. Right? Think about the difference of information that one conveys to the other. Right? So think about how you're actually shooting your product images. If you're just taking stock images, maybe that the manufacturer gives you, you may not be giving enough information for people to know how to actually purchase the product, and it might not be persuasive enough. Or even imagine if we were just selling fruit, something that's as simple as a pear, right? You can go ahead and you can create products that really tell a full story. Or even if you're selling, let's say, things like apparel, do you show the sweaters by themselves, or do you show them with people modeling it? Right? All of these things are incredible variables that can impact things. I blogged about this another time where even the direction of the eyes of the model on your landing pages can have an impact. So you need to be very careful about what you're choosing to understand all these different issues. All right, something went backwards on our slides. Okay. This even matters in business-to-business and lead generation issues. So here's a client of ours from a few years back that we wanted to test basically his samples page. And what we found is when we looked at the samples page that, he does yellow page ad design. And when you looked at the yellow page ads and they look beautiful, they wouldn't give you a lot of context. And we came up with the hypothesis that if he was able to show some before and after images, it would be more persuasive for people. And sure enough, he made 2 or 3 other main changes, but the key change to his website was this. And his overall improvements, he went from about 5 to 7 leads a month to about 35 to 40 leads a month. So huge, huge impact by just rethinking about how to present to people in a more effective way. Now, some of the variables that matter when you think about product images include things like product quality, right? How obvious is it what the picture is showing from the image that you display? Today, with the rise of things like YouTube and stuff like that, should you use video instead of product images, especially on some of your e-commerce or lead generation landing pages? This can have a huge impact for people. Or even things like highlighting the benefits for products, right? Not just showing the product, but really taking the time to outline, here's this feature, and really conveying it out for people. Another great example, and this is one of the early beta testers with Google Website Optimizers, we wanted to test how effective Flash was on the homepage. So on the image on the left, you see this beautiful warehouse of all the mattresses that Mattress Liquidators actually had. And we said, what if we changed it to a much more static image? But what we did is we conveyed some real benefits about what the store was about. And we were able to decrease abandonment on this homepage by almost 30% by just changing that one image. So it can have a major, major, major impact if you're paying attention to this stuff. Now, let me give you another example to look at this from a category page test and how we approach actually testing something for a client. So here's a category page for somebody who sells New York Mets autographed jersey. And when we look at category pages, we typically break them out into 3 different sections. Okay, we call it the gallery, right? That's the part that lets you know you're in the right place. The search and refine, and then ultimately they show you some product selection. Well, what we'll do today is focus purely on the gallery part. Because if you look at this gallery, you'll see, from an SEO perspective, they're doing a wonderful job. They have an H1 tag for the New York Mets autographed jersey, good stuff. They have these breadcrumbs, but they're not really the way most people expect to see breadcrumbs, so that may be an issue. We may want to test that. And while this information is all factually correct, there really is no visual or emotional appeal. Maybe we can do some stuff to test to see which one has greater impact. And so what we literally do is say, okay, let's look at some different ways that we could possibly do this gallery to go test it. So maybe we redo whether the breadcrumbs are linked or not linked, or if they're on the left side or on the right side, right? Do we feature products in the gallery? Do we feature a logo? Do we make it just a static gallery with more of a lifestyle image that shows a range of images related to the Mets? Again, just test which one is more effective. And so just kind of getting a sense of what really matters, and once we know what matters for the customer, then we can go and refine this to make this part better and better and better until we get the optimal conversion rate. Headlines. There are dozens of ways to improve your headlines. Let me give you just 3 quick ways to modify your current headlines or think about them so you can improve them. You can test fractions or percentages, right, in your headlines to prove a claim. Here are some common ways to do it. You can test asking questions, right? Oftentimes questions lead people in and engage people into reading further paragraphs. And of course you can test what I like to call self-focused versus customer-focused words. Are you talking all about yourself, how great we are the number one, I am the best, right? Or are you talking about the benefits that you can give your customer? You can learn, you can get the most bang out, whatever it is, and try to change the context of the text. So it's really powerful to do that. Now, this is just a simple example from a client of ours using Google Website Optimizer who went ahead and changed this headline from 68% of Americans are magnesium deficient to 2/3 of Americans are magnesium deficient. Now, general rule in copywriting, and Tom, I did write a book called Persuasive Online Copywriting many, many years ago, is that the more specific the math that you give them, so like a percentage of 68, usually it's more concrete and better for the visitor. But we're never going to lie on the assumptions of it should be better. So we went ahead and tested it, and tested the two-thirds to see if making it simpler for people to grasp the concept mattered more. And sure enough, this and a couple of other changes to that page basically helped them lift their conversion rate from this landing page from 10.3% to 19.6%. We've almost doubled conversion rate on what was already a great landing page. So words really do matter. You should be testing the offer itself. I mean, that's the number one thing any copywriter will tell you. Test how you position the offer, what you say about it, what the benefits are about it. Test whether you're using long copy or short copy. Are you using lots of bullets, or are you using big blocks of text? Are you interspersing them? Test long paragraphs versus short paragraphs and short sentences. Test punctuation. Oftentimes we'll play with punctuation on a headline or on a paragraph, and you can change, exclamation points to commas, to periods and stuff like that, and you can see, big gains from this. Test the order of your copy. You never know which personality type is going to be dominant on a particular page of yours. So if you go ahead and you rotate the different paragraphs to see which ones make more sense and have more impact for the different visitors, you'll get a better chance to see which one will convert better. Test the placement of the copy on the image. Again, Tom talked about 2 or 3 column layouts. Well, maybe you want to test doing pull quotes. Right? Those kind of things will make a big impact to see if people can engage with it. Test what words you use. Different words have different meanings, right? Everybody wants to be normal, but no one wants to be average. Test the voice of your copy. Is it formal? Is it informal? Does it have a lot of attitude? One of my favorite sites to take a look at, and they're not a client or anything, but they do a great copy every day, is Woot.com, WOOT.com. Just look at the way they write their copy. Do a better job at editing your copy and removing words that really don't carry a lot of meaning. Test your font size. We worked with one client. We were able to enlarge their font size, and we were able to give them a significant boost just by making the font more legible because they had an older audience. Test your links, whether they're blue or they're underlined, if they're different colors, all those kind of things. And, of course, test the wordings on your call to action, on your buttons, on your links, and what I like to call the points of resolution as well as your points of action. So let's look at what I talk about when I talk about points of action. Think about the point where you're ready to submit a button, you're ready to subscribe or fill out a lead or to purchase something. You have questions, naturally you have questions. So this is an example, say, from our newsletter in the past where when you used to fill out the form to become a newsletter subscriber and we asked you to enter your name and your email address, obviously a lot of things that people are concerned about is the privacy policy. And so right there, right next to the button, we added this little reassurance that said, we value your privacy. Or we were working with a company that supplied leads, and we had a few different lead forms throughout their website. Most of the lead forms promised a 24-hour response time. However, we had a few places where if they went ahead, we actually put it right next to the submit button. It said guaranteed 2-hour response time during business hours. And again, that impacted conversions tremendously. And lastly, for e-commerce sites, right, think about when you're in the shopping cart and you've added products to your cart, you don't want people going ahead looking at what your privacy policy is. So right there, right at the point of action when they're filling out the forms, you can see that right in the right-hand column, this site has actually articulated exactly what people are looking for. The same thing happens when we're on e-commerce sites in that ready-to-buy area, right? Right when we're ready to click the Add to Cart button, you can add information around it to build confidence. Things like adding reviews right next to it, or having in-stock messaging, or letting people know exactly when the item's going to ship, or letting them know that you can have free or flat rate shipping. All of these things will boost confidence for people. Again, this is part of that intuitive layer of testing. Add to cart buttons, or any buttons for that matter, there's basically 8 variables to consider when you're thinking about cart buttons. You want to consider what words do you have on there, right? If you're trying to get people to add items in an e-commerce site, you're going to use things like add to cart, add to shopping bag, add to shopping cart, buy now, those kind of words. But, if you are a newsletter, you may want to have subscribe now or subscribe to our weekly newsletter. Just test the wording on there. Test the shape. Is it round? Is it rectangle? Does it have rounded corners? All these things really matter. Test the size. How big is it in relation to the rest of your page? Is it too small? Is it too large? What kind of style is it? Is it flat? Is it two-dimensional? Is it three-dimensional? Does it have shadowing? All of these things can have an impact on your buttons. Does it have an icon on it? Does it have an arrow? Does it have a shopping bag? Does it have a shopping cart? Does it have no icon? Right? Does it have something more customized? All of these things can have an impact. What color? The key to color is understanding that you want to have a color that's high contrast to the rest of your page. Oftentimes you'll see people test things with red buttons because red is a very high contrast color. But it only contrasts because most websites out there are blue. Test which colors work best for your site. Is the button legible? And of course, where is it located? Here's another approach of testing logical versus emotional approach. When we were working with Dell in their configurator, they used to have the words, when they showed the different options they have for each part of the configurator, the words learn more, which is a very logical wording for people who are probably earlier in the buying process. As soon as we were able to change the words to help me choose, okay, which is much more emotionally engaging, they were able to basically reap millions of dollars in benefit from changing those three little words. So it can have a huge impact, just tiny little things. Here's another practice example. Just make things more obvious for people where to click. This is one of the beta clients for Google Website Optimizer, and if you notice, just under the image on the top there was roughly where the fold was for most visitors. And the problem is most of their main categories were buried below the fold. So we asked them if they couldn't change the size of the image, but if they could just put the words casual shoes, dress shoes, fashion boots, and work boots, and sandals right underneath that image, could we impact conversion? And sure enough, that's all we did, and we were able to increase conversion rate by 18%. Little things have big impact. And last tip is don't make them wait. More and more, I mean, we're even hearing news about, what impact load time has on people. I think a lot of people forget how important it is when they used to dial up with dial-up to feel how slow the web felt. And when they go to broadband, they were so excited because it went so much faster. And now that they're on broadband, they still feel that websites are too slow. And as designers have seen the pipes get larger, they decided to make images larger and larger. But that doesn't necessarily impact conversion in a positive way. So here's a classic example of two almost identical images. And one of the best ways that you can do is take an image that beforehand was 55K, which takes about 8 seconds to load on a 56K connection, or an extra second on a T1, and substitute it for an optimized image to see what kind of impact it has for conversion using Google Website Optimizer. And that one image loaded in less than a second. So it had a real impact. So that would be fractional on a T1 line. Or similar images, images, same story here. One was 58K, one was 7K. Again, almost 8 seconds to 1 second, and they had a significant impact on conversion. I want to leave you with one last rule to think about when you're thinking about testing. It's what I like to call the golden rule. The first part of the golden rule is that he who has the gold rules. So your customers are the ones who are voting with their dollars, and Google Website Optimizer lets you get a better sense of what your customers actually want. And so you want to test as often as you can and as powerfully as you can to get some big results. The other part of the golden rule that's really important to get an understanding of is that if you have any kind of religious background, you may have heard it as do unto others as you like others to do unto you. And that's great in many ways, but it doesn't necessarily work for when we're thinking about marketing on the web. Because unfortunately, most of our customers are not exactly like us. They know less about the products. They're not as intimately involved with them. So they need you to have a better understanding of them to serve them better. So the golden rule here is do unto them as they'd like to be done onto. I wish you the best of luck with your continued testing. And Tom, I guess we're ready to open it up to some questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. So I think at this point we received a number of questions over the course of registration and actually as the webinar has come together. And I've summarized some of the most popular ones in the next slide here. And I've divided them into questions that I thought would be most appropriate for you to answer, and then questions that I can answer as well. And what we can do is let's move on to the first one. So one of the things that a lot of people have asked is, well, look, I don't have a lot of traffic, and I don't want to wait forever to get my results. And you know, as a result of things like this webinar, there seems to be an ocean of things that I can test. What are some great things to test for your first test if you don't have a lot of time, but you want to see some improvements as soon as possible?
Absolutely. You know, I think one of the key things, and you know, we're working with several clients who are in the same kind of situation. You want to test the things that have very high impact, right? The things that are more persuasive. You also want to test some of the things because sometimes often you don't have a lot of traffic. Some of those bigger persuasive things you don't have the resources for. So start focusing on some of the more of those intuitive areas, such as adding the point of actions in your checkout process. You know, adding things like when items will ship and if they're in stock right next to your buy button. Or if you're a lead generation site, go ahead and if you're trying to offer a download, do better images for the white paper, or do a better job at showcasing what your software looks like. And so those are the kinds of things that have a much greater potential to improve conversion on a short-term basis, and you should see results much better and much faster.
Great. The next question we got from a number of folks was e-commerce merchants who have long and detailed checkout funnels, and they have a sense that it's probably not optimal, but they're not certain where to begin with a multi-step checkout process.
Yeah, so I go back to the first thing. First thing I do is start worrying about adding some of those point of action assurances. That's the first thing. And then again, those are simple and not very technical, so you can start seeing some gains there. Other things you want to do is make sure to add things like progress indicators along the site to let people know how many steps they're going to be. One of the most interesting tests we've ever done with a client several years ago was we had redesigned a website based on another client that we worked on to knock down their shopping cart abandonment. And we wrote about this in Call to Action, how we reduced the shopping cart abandonment of Cafe Press from an incredible 35% down to a 15%. And so we implemented a fairly similar checkout for another merchant. And what would happen was we wanted to test whether a one-page checkout was optimal for them. And what we found for that particular merchant was that a two-page checkout was. So one of the things that, again, it's always surprising, it's always up to your audience. If you have a multi-step checkout, first thing you want to do is try to reduce it. Somewhere under 4 steps is absolutely necessary. And the one way you can do it, and from a technical perspective, probably one of the easiest ways to do it is more of an A/B test, where you're literally taking people down 2 different pathways of checkout, as opposed to just testing different variables within the checkout.
That's great, Brian. If they have determined that, let's say, a multi-page checkout process is actually superior to a single-page checkout process, and then they want to dig in further and improve each of those steps, those 3 steps, do you recommend that they start by optimizing the last step and move backwards, or the first step and move forwards, or how do you suggest people look at that?
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, the first thing I would do is I would look at my analytics, right? Obviously with things like Google Analytics out there for free and with funnel reports that they do, they really give you a good opportunity to see the steps along the process where you're losing the greatest amount of traffic. And so the point at where you're losing the greatest amount of traffic is going to be, really critical. I've seen websites where the big drop-offs are within, step 1 and step 2, and others that the big drop-offs between, steps 4 and 5. So first you need to identify where those big holes are and then work from there. And again, Google Optimizer will help you test what to do to improve it, but you're going to need to use something like Google Analytics or another analytics tool to help you identify where you need to test.
Great. So on the next slide, we have a few more questions. Someone said, I've already doubled my conversion rate by fixing probably some low-hanging fruit. What are some things to do once you've done sort of the basics, like the layout, the copy, and a compelling image? What are some things that you find people overlook in terms of opportunities to do ongoing testing?
Yeah, I think one of the big areas is again, if we come back to the hierarchy of optimization, there is the persuasive stuff, right? Well, it sounds like, and I congratulate for doubling conversion rate, that you've gotten all the usability and accessibility and functional issues out of the way. Now how do you deal with the more persuasive and intuitive things? And so, you're going to be looking at things like testing which images work better, which headlines work better, what words you're using in your hyperlink, what words you're using in your point of action assurances. what visuals you're using, what size, headlines to draw them out more. But you can do different kinds of things like that to draw attention to key pieces that will be more persuasive. And again, it's a lot harder to do. We recently completed an engagement with a client of ours that, there really was no low-hanging fruit. And, even some of the things that there was a couple of tests that we were able to do, like, moving a pricing table above the fold as opposed to below the fold. That's really important. But, what we were able to determine that there was one key area in their process that is ultimately persuasive to drive sales. And, they're a software site, and their product tool was the key area. And, it wasn't like it could be solved overnight because you have to figure out what drives the most amount of audience. And so the focus now purely is how to keep improving that tool and just coming out with out-of-the-box ways and testing to see which one gives the best results.
Great. And I think the final question we have is something that a lot of people would be very interested in is when you look at a client's page for the first time, what goes through your head the first 30 seconds that you're reviewing a potential client's website?
Well, I already answered that, and that was the first slide for the presentation. I literally go through the 4 perspectives. I jump into each one of their shoes and say, if I were a customer and I was spontaneous, what do I see out of this page? If I was a customer and I was competitive, what would I get out of this page? If I was humanistic, if I were spontaneous, and literally try to see what are the questions I have about the page, what doesn't feel right for me, what questions I need further answered. And it helps me identify what to test next. Because at the end of the day, human beings will be human beings. This is something that's hardwired. There's, years and years of evidence about how people, gather information and make decisions. And we're just using, those years of science to be able to get a better understanding of how people are trying to operate when they're trying to make purchases and become leads online.
Right. And I think we're going to jump right now to the last slide, and I'll wrap up. I know that we're running over time. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for attending this webinar, and hopefully you found it useful. And to sort of summarize some of the takeaways, one of them is that controlled experimentation is really critical to maximizing your conversion rates, and the only way to really be able to do that is to combine good hypotheses like what Brian was talking about with technology to then confirm that that's right for your audience and find the optimal mix. Second thing is Website Optimizer is a great tool to do that if you decide to perform testing. It's free and lets you do unlimited testing on all of your traffic. Really think a lot about what Brian talked about with regards to personas and how to increase your conversion rate by thinking about, well, who is coming to my site and what is it that they expect to see and how certain people will look for certain things. And lastly, everything can be tested, and there are additional resources, and archived version of this webinar will also be available at the Website Optimizer homepage at google.com/Website Optimizer. So I really appreciate everybody for visiting and listening to this conversation. Hopefully it was useful. This will be an ongoing series of webinars that we provide about Website Optimizer and testing and content experimentation. And a special thanks to Brian for joining us.